Hey, first let me begin. I just want to tell you how brave I think you are for coming, for getting in the car, for driving in this direction and moving it, and because you're tuning in or watching or clicking this Blue Christmas service. And I want to say that while Elvis may have made this theme famous, right, with his blue snowflakes and his blue memories, the Blue Christmas idea started well before Elvis. And so I want to believe this because honestly, today, and this service has less to do with blue as it does with light and hope. Because I think we'll all agree that this year has already been enough blue. The blue has been so intense already this year. And so what I'd like to do, if you'll allow me permission, is I would like to hold your hand with you for just a little part of your journey here tonight and take a few steps with you. Because everyone here tonight is on a different place in their journey. Everyone watching here today is in a different place on how you're handling it and going through the loss that you've experienced this year. And each person's story is so unique. No two story in here on the way that grief took place and the loss that you're experiencing is identical. And so the thing is we're not here tonight to kind of compare, right? And oftentimes I know when we get in scenarios like this and it's kind of like, oh yeah, well this is what happened, and oh yeah, well this is. We're not here to compare kind of the grief stories that we've been on. We're really here to support one another. And I'm so glad you've carved out this time to support one another. So I thought we could begin first by getting all on the same page, and let's all get a little bit of anger and frustration out together. I promise you this will be a safe place. But how many of you have just gotten angry at somebody else this year who's not grieving? I mean, you heard somebody and you just got angry at them, right? You didn't even know where the anger came from. They're sitting there because they're so upset because they couldn't find any toilet paper this year, and they're just beat mad, and you look at them, and because you're dealing extreme loss. And you look at them and you go, toilet paper? You watch on social media and somebody's freaking out because their T-ball season was canceled, and you're going, T-ball? Right? And then you're kind of processing things, and then you hear about somebody, they couldn't take their vacation or their cruise was canceled, and you're trying your best to shed a tear for them, and you got nothing, right? In fact, you want to slap them a little bit, don't you? Because you want to say to them and go, why? I don't think you understand. You know what's happened in my life and in my house and with my family or with my friend this past year, and it becomes difficult because they're talking about, I couldn't go to this concert. It was canceled. And you try your best, and you're just kind of there, but deep down, you just go, oh, you're a good thing we got a social distance. Or I might experience a little bit of love and compassion with you with my right hand. Because they've been inconvenienced in 2020, haven't they? They've been inconvenienced, and you have experienced something far greater than just an inconvenience. Because an inconvenience suggests that something will go back to the way it was. That's not what's taking place in your life this year. Because this year has been a little bit harder, which makes it harder when we hear people just kind of complaining about their year. Well, let me introduce myself. My name is Paul Johnson, and I grew up here in Valparaiso. I went to Thomas Jefferson Middle School. I grew up hating Benjamin Franklin Middle School, right? I mean, that's just what you do. I went to Valparaiso High School, and then I went off to college, and I really never returned back here to this place after that. I got married to my wife, Erin, and we went off and we became youth pastors in Virginia, in the Shenandoah Valley, Virginia. And then we were out there serving for several years, and along came Graham, who's with us here tonight. And Graham was just a cute little bugger back then, and he had this little curly hair. Oh, still does. And he was a part of our lives then, and we were growing, and so excited to have Graham a part of our life, and it just made things richer and better. And then we found out that we were expecting again. And I'll be honest with you. I'm not really proud about this, but I panicked a little bit. Because Graham and his sister were just like 22 months apart. And it just kind of made me just kind of have a hard time, 20 months apart, breathing. Like, oh my goodness, how are we going to do this? God, what is your plan here? And how are we going to move forward on this? And so we found out we were going to have a little girl. And man, I was so excited because I just... Girls smell better than boys do. And it was so great to have that. And we were so excited, and I was nervous. And Brooke came, and I remember when she was born, she came as this Just this little perfect package. And all that worry and all that angst about how are we going to have two little kids running around and how are we going to do that, it all just dissipated because you just looked at this little precious little girl, and it was just amazing to be there. And she was growing. She was just a small little thing, and we would go to the doctor, and we would go into the doctor's appointments, and they would say, "Oh yeah, you got a perfectly healthy little girl," and we would keep going back and forth. But she just kind of was a little bit delayed in some stuff. And you go to the doctor, and the doctor begins to say, "Hey, it's okay. All kids develop at different rates. Everybody's unique. Their stories are unique, and just relax, go back." But Aaron's mother's intuition just sort of took over. And I remember she would look at me and she goes, I think there's something wrong. And I look back and I would go, no, the doctor said it's just everybody's at different rates and, it's fine and we'll be okay. And she goes, no, something's just not quite right. There's a developmental delay here, that's something. And so after her intuition kind of kicked in a little further, we went to some doctors and they finally got us in to see a specialist. And we went to go meet with that specialist. And that specialist wanted to run some tests, and so we were down in Indianapolis, and we were running tests for our sweet little girl. And then we were on our way back home, and we got a call from the doctor's office, because when you leave the doctor's office, you all know, and everybody in here most likely has learned more about medical stuff this year than you ever dreamed possible. And we're on our way back from the doctor's office, and we got a call from the doctor, right after they say, we'll be in touch like 5 to 10 days. They called us immediately and said, if you haven't left, you need to turn back around. We have a room waiting for you at Riley's Children's Hospital. And we turned around. And we heard the worst words that a parent can ever hear. And that is, your daughter has a terminal disease. There's certain words that just ought not go together, right? There's certain phrases that many of you have heard this year that you just go, they're incongruent. They just don't begin to mesh in a way that seems to be rational, like oncology and pediatric. I mean, those are just words that we ought not have together, and yet I'm grateful for the people that serve in those capacities and love in those capacities. Our daughter had a rare neurological issue. And those days in the hospital turned into weeks of therapies and tests as we began to try to identify and articulate what exactly was taking place in her life and what we could do as parents. And so what we do is we study and we Google. And all of you know, if you've ever been to a doctor's office, the number one thing they tell you not to do is what? Google. But what do? You Google. And the reason they don't want you to Google is because Google usually represents the worst case scenarios of what can happen. But all of us in this room are aware that sometimes the worst does happen. And as we begin to go through those pieces, the disease began to go, and we prayed, and we determined we were going to do whatever it took, and we prayed, and how many of you this year, I mean, you don't have to raise your hand, I know it's true, how many of you this year, you prayed, but you didn't just pray like, oh God, you prayed like you were cutting deals with God. God, if you, then I will, right? God, if you would just remove this, then I will. I mean, I had all kinds of deals with God. Like, God, if you'll do this, I'll go anywhere in the world. I'll eat anything at any place and go. And I'll tell everybody in the world about how you healed my daughter. Because honestly, that's the story that I wanted to tell. This isn't the story that I wanted to tell. The story that you're carrying tonight is not the story that you were hoping to tell right now either. And she kept getting worse, and the disease continued to take away her sight, and it ultimately compromised her hearing, but she retained her sense of smell to the very end. And Erin, my gracious wife, she held her in her arms until the very end. And our daughter Brooke was comforted by her sense of smell because she knew that her mother was holding her. And then that moves us into those periods of funeral. And those of you who have experienced funerals this year, you know it's like this out-of-body experience, isn't it? I mean, you're there and you understand what's happening functionally, but it's very difficult to kind of attach emotionally to the moment that's taking place, because in some capacity, to be present is to kind of admit that this is actually happening. And sometimes we feel in these moments like we're in the room, but we're watching ourselves, and it feels like we're watching ourselves in a movie that we never wanted to be in. And it's almost like detachment. And man, I struggled with this for so long, going, man, I just feel so disconnected. I feel like if I could just be present in this moment. And I think years later, I kind of came to the conclusion that I actually think that that's like God's grace. So those moments this year when you felt like, man, I just don't feel present in my body, I think maybe rather than feeling guilty in those moments, just go, I think that may be God's grace just kind of comforting me. Because if I had to deal with the magnitude of this loss right now, I don't know if I could make it. And God may just be kind of separating a little bit of those pieces as we begin to go through it. And we go into those funeral moments, and we've all experienced the funeral line where well-meaning people say things that they think are going to be helpful to you. I had one person, they said, well, God needed another flower in his garden. There again, I'm not a violent person, but I mean, you know, there again, it was the right arm. Just wanted to touch somebody's face. Or God needed another flower in his garden, or God needed another angel, or heaven needed her more than you did. And I understand what they're trying to say. And all people in times of pain, they just repeat what they heard somebody else say. It doesn't mean that it's true or they don't believe it, but they just repeat, right? What they've heard. And those would be great, except none of those things are true. And then you find yourself in this moment where you are tonight, where this work of grief must be done. And I didn't do so great with grief. Now, my wife, she read anything and everything she could get her hands on. She would podcast. She would do all that, and she would just kind of to go in. I just sort of sucked it up and went to work. We went to a grief group, and I remember our first night going to that grief group. And if you're not a part of a grief group, or if you've not been in a community trying to do grief, Sean at the end tonight is going to be, and those watching online, you're going to have opportunity to participate and join as well. And I just want to encourage you that when that invitation comes, do it. Please do it. Grief is essential to be in community. And so when you have that opportunity, please fight whatever voices in your head are saying, no, I'm good. Please just push those aside and take that step forward. And we went to that grief group, and I remember the first night walking in, and you may have experienced this even tonight. I remember driving into the parking lot going, I'm not getting out of the car, right? And then going, if anybody's too weird when I get to the door, I'm out, right? And I went, and I finally made it into the door. My wife was in there. And our assignment on the very first night is we went and we sat down at a table, and we sat down at the table, and our assignment was you need to say your loved one's name out loud. And I think that's actually what I want to do here tonight, is just before we go any further, I want you, when I get to the count of 3, I want you to say your loved one's name out loud, first and last name tonight. Can you do that? If you're watching at home or on your computer or on your phone, I want you right where you are, even if you just whisper it, can you just say your loved one's name here tonight? 1, 2, 3. Brooke Johnson. Can I tell you that's a beautiful name? Just a beautiful name. And you've not only missed that person, you've also missed hearing their name. And it's okay to say their name, because stuffing it in and ignoring it, that is not healing. Remembering well is about saying the word. And I got to be honest with you. Sometimes you say the word, you don't want to say it out loud because you don't know how the people around you are processing it or handling it. And you're afraid that if you say that name, it may cause somebody else to cry or to have emotion. But I just need to let you know tonight something that over the years I've learned, that the opposite of remember is not forget. We think that if we forget something, it means I don't remember it. But the opposite of remember is not forget. It's actually to dismember. And so what we do when we remember is we're actually putting something together again. And this is why memories and stories and pictures are so important, because you're in the process of remembering that person that you just said their name. And even if it's just for a moment, even if it's just for a few minutes, even if it's for a half an hour, through memories and stories and pictures and saying their name, you have the great ability to put back together what sickness and disease and death have taken from you. Because the only thing that's wrong to do in times of grief is to do nothing. You don't need to set a goal to, be over this by a certain time. And I would never suggest that getting over it is something that should be a goal, because you loved this person, and love is not something you just want to try to get over. Yes, your future is going to look a little bit different now, but grief is hard. Tonight, I want to explain a little bit of how grief kind of works in the Bible, and I want to kind of explain somebody who's just kind of been my hero all throughout my life. It's the Apostle Paul, because he gives us some language to kind of help understand grief. He was like this avid sports guy. And he's always using sports analogies. For those of you who are Christ followers, or if you're Christian, even if you're not, that's okay. But if you are, you've kind of heard the Apostle Paul say, run the race and all this. And so this is a guy that loves sports metaphors. He loves athletics. And oftentimes, we don't necessarily know if he was an athlete, but he loved to attend athletic events, right? And so I want you to picture when the words I'm about ready to read, I want you to picture the Apostle Paul like sitting in the stadium, sitting in the stands, watching this, and I want you to see if you can figure out what kind of an athletic event, he's in the first century right there, what kind of an athletic event would he be talking about? So in 2 Corinthians chapter 4, verse 6, we have this great passage of Scripture, and I'm going to read the first two verses, and then I'm going to give you your thing, and you can see if you can figure this out. For God, who said, let light shine out of darkness, he made his light shine in our hearts to give us the light of the knowledge of the God's glory displayed in the face of Christ. But then pay attention to this. He says, but we have this treasure in jars of clay to show that this all-surpassing power is from God and not from us. Now, I want you to find yourself in the first century, get in the stands, get your ticket. If this is the Olympics, those first Greek Olympics, this is where he is. Corinth is in Greece. He's in the stands, and he says this, we are hard-pressed on every side, but we're not crushed. We're perplexed, but not in despair. He looks over to the guy next to him and says, look, see here, see what's happening right here? We're persecuted, right? But we're not abandoned. Oh, look right there, he was struck down, but he was not destroyed. So what sport is the Apostle Paul watching? All bets are on Greco-Roman wrestling, right? Greco-Roman wrestling. Anybody know what the uniforms were for Greco-Roman wrestling in the first century? Yeah, olive oil. You put olive oil on your body, and they put you in a sand pit, and that was your uniform. And then you tried to knock somebody down, you tried to outsmart them, you tried to use your intellect to move and your body to begin to do all of these things. And the Apostle Paul says, look, sometimes your life, and this is especially true for those of you who are grieving, sometimes it's like you're crushed, you're pressed on every side, you're perplexed, you're persecuted. But then he gives us this great language. He says, but all of this is hidden in you in jars of clay. So do you have any guess if you have olive oil all over your body and you're rolling around in sand? Do you know what you're going to look like? Some translations call it an earthen vessel. The Apostle Paul wanted you to know that you're like a jar of clay. Look at the guys wrestling in the sand. They look like a clay jar. They look like a clay pot. And what has been given into you from your heavenly Father is stored in a place that what's taking place on the outside of it, even though grief and depression and despair is so real, there's something deep inside of you that your heavenly Father has put in you that even though you're pressed and perplexed and overwhelmed and pushed on every side, because you've been battling this year with a loved one. you've been battling as they've gone to doctors. Some of you have been to more doctor's appointments. Some of you have learned more doctors and medical terms than you ever wanted to imagine. Some of you have felt so tired and alone and because of what the disease has done. But what the Apostle Paul wants you to remember, even though through all the funerals and all those pieces, God's presence has not left you, even though you may feel alone, tired, despaired, overwhelmed, persecuted, because you are an earthen vessel. You are a jar of clay. And yeah, there's a deep ache that takes place inside of you. There's a deep ache that sleeping more every day, does it help? No. Can't get there. Does eating more and getting the munchies, does that kind of help hit that deep ache? You've tried, no. Does drinking, does that kind of help numb that ache? Maybe for a moment. Counseling, when you go to counseling and you try to help, and yeah, it feels better for a moment, and that's an important thing, and it kind of helps manage that deep, deep ache. But there's a part of you that there's going to be a deep ache, and it will get subtly better over time. But there's a part of that won't go away. And for so long, I struggled with that. Because there are certain things I just wanted to feel again. Because I just couldn't quite get down to that deep spot, deep within me, and I so wanted some relief. And then one day I realized, you know what, Paul, you know what that deep ache actually feels like? It feels like homesickness. Now, you know where I grew up. I told you earlier I grew up here, right? I grew up in Valparaiso. I went to school here, went to church here, right? I grew up, but I kind of analyzed that, and I wasn't homesick for Valparaiso. It wasn't like I had this longing to come back to Valparaiso, although I love this town. I grew up in this town, have great memories here. But I wasn't homesick for my parents' house. I wasn't looking to move back in with my parents. Because this ache was deeper than homesickness. We're going to go back to the Apostle Paul, and we're going to stay in the same book. We're just going to flip over one more chapter, and he's going to kind of let us know what this deep ache is that he's talking about. Because you are homesick, but your homesickness is now for heaven. 2 Corinthians chapter 5, verse 6. The Apostle Paul continues, and he says, "Therefore we are always confident and know that as long as we are at home in the body, we are away from the Lord, for we live by faith, not by sight." And we are confident, I say, and would prefer to be away from the body and at home with the Lord. So, let's talk just for the last few moments about today, this day, why we're here. Why now? Why do we have a blue Christmas? Why does this moment even matter? It's because the darkness of grief is long. December, sure it has, it's the holiday of lights. Yes, we have artificial lights that we put around. We have Hanukkah in this season, which is the season of lights, the celebration of lights. We have Christmas, and it's all about light. But one of the reasons we set aside a night like tonight and we have a service like the one we have today is because it's a reminder of hope. So what is a blue Christmas? Why do they do a blue Christmas? It's because you know this already. Today when you were driving around town or you were driving here or when you got up today and you looked out the window and then all of a sudden the sun went down today at 4:30, right? And it's dark. And the reason that we have blue Christmas and not like a blue 4th of July or anything like that, the reason it's blue Christmas is because it's a reminder. When we come up to Christmas, that darkness, the darkness of grief, seems like it's becoming more every day, doesn't it? Seems like grief just has kind of grown day after day after day. And so years ago, they set up a liturgy that reminded us that, yes, grief does have that moment. But when they got to the winter solstice, this is also why we have Christmas, where we have Christmas on our calendar. When was Jesus' birthday? Well, we're not exactly sure. But it's all about light. And we set Blue Christmas at this time because it's literally going to be a reminder every day for you. You're going to forget most of the things that I talked about tonight, and that's fine. But every day, here in just a few days, something's going to happen in your life. There's going to be just a little bit more daylight. And next week, and the 2 weeks after that, and by the time the end of the month, there's just going to be a little bit more light after that. And then we're going to get into January, and the days are going to start getting longer. And there's going to be just incrementally a little bit more light in your life. And we pause in a night tonight for Blue Christmas because we're reminded that, yes, grief has kind of filled our world with a lot of darkness. And it feels like our days, and there's just hardly any light and any hope some days. But it's a reminder of what the Apostle Paul said, and he really got all his stuff, I think, from John when we look at this. That it's been a dark year for a lot of reasons, but especially for what you've gone through. But as we mark this time as Blue Christmas, soon there's just going to be a little bit more light, a little bit more hope in your life. John, the gospel writer, he just writes it so beautifully in John chapter 14. He says, look, do not let your hearts be troubled, even though you've experienced trouble. You believe in God. Believe also in me. My Father's house has many rooms. If it were not so, would I have told you that I am going there to prepare a place for you? And if I go and prepare a place for you, I will come back and take you to be with me, that you also may be where I am. You know the way to the place where I am going. And I think that's why there's a homesickness that we just can't quite touch. And it'll just stay there. But if you let it, it will encourage you and spur you on to stay focused with your life, with the days that you have, on Jesus. And let me just encourage you. You're going to make it. I know you're going to make it. The days are going to get a little bit longer. Continue to kind of remember with those memories this holiday season. Have a plan this holiday. No, yes, the holidays will be hard. Remember, alter some of your traditions. It will be okay. But know this, you will make it, but don't go it alone. Continue to say their name and find people and places like a good community support group that makes it safe for you to continue to say their name. Can I pray with you today? Heavenly Father, I know you have created us in such a way that we have emotions. I know that you've created us in such a way that we feel things, and God, most days I'm so grateful for that. When it's the joy of a baby being born, or the joy of the sunrise, or the joy, it's wonderful to feel that. But then on the backside of that, there are some things that we feel and we experience that are so hard. And it feels like we're in a wrestling match. It feels like we've been pinned to the ground. It feels like we're just getting beat up. But in the midst of that darkness, in the midst of the despair, you've said that we hold inside of us this hope of heaven, eternal hope that's the gift of Jesus himself that lives within us for those of us who know you and believe. So God, would you help us to believe in you even during this most difficult season of the year for those of us who have lost in 2020? And remember, no matter how hard and how pressed and no matter the despair, that the hope inside of us remain stable in that jar of clay. We are that jar of clay. So God, would you encourage us each and every day as the days start to get incrementally just a little bit longer that you have released just for us a little bit more light and a little bit more hope. So help us to stay focused on eternity. It's in your Son's name we pray. Amen.